look forward to hearing from you.
Well, thank you, Gail. We look forward to hearing from you a little bit more. If you could join me on screen and we can start answering some of these questions that have been rolling in. Hello.
Hi, happy to be here.
Great. Let's jump into our first question. How can museums in the global north build redistribution programs that aren't just another form of cultural control or soft power?
Mike, thanks. That's a very good question. And I've actually been asked it before. What I think is, first of all, I did a book on soft power, so I kind of think that soft power is a good thing. But I think the issue that you're really raising that's important is how can we prevent the availability of our collections from being just another form of cultural control, which obviously over the past couple of hundred years we've become in the global north pretty expert in. I think that that's a great challenge. And I think that if people get on board with redistribution, which we can do from either a sense of self-interest, we just can't keep, our societies actually can't keep affording to keep expanding museums in order to store stuff, right? For all the reasons I gave at the first part of the talk. And I think that it's really something that we all have to get on board with, and then we're going to study it and figure it out. Let's figure out something that will do some good, rather than some of the other things we spend our time on.
To dig into this ideal a little bit more, if in this ideal, what are the steps to get people on board that might move us in that direction?
Well, that's also a really interesting question. I think thinking deeply about the situation that we're in, understanding in a way the paradoxes involved. And that's why I choose the example of we live with these paradoxes in other fields. That's why I chose the example of traffic. We build highways, more cars. We build more highways, more cars. And yet it takes us all longer to get to wherever we wanted to go, if we can even remember where we wanted to go. Frankly, I think it's a pretty good parallel. So I think, first of all, it means taking on board we have a problem. One of the reasons why we don't take it on board, and I'm going to give a long answer to your very good short question, is that museums find it easier to raise capital money than operating money. I think that's a truism. None of it is easy. Nothing in our field is easy. But if you had to say what's easier, the capital project is easier to raise money for, whether it's government or private or corporate or whatever, than the operating costs. And so we cling to expansion because it's a way of creating interest, enthusiasm, and quite frankly, needed resources. So we need to overcome that. And it's not surprising, and it's not morally bad. I mean, we have to stop being so moralistic about things and just kind of be practical and pragmatic about it. So that means getting on board to the paradoxes, and those are just two paradoxes in our situation. I think the other is we need more data. Can you imagine that the last time that a study was done on the actual cost of collection management and maintaining collections, which is, the core purpose, even if the collections are not physical, but they're more idea museums, which I'm a big advocate of, spent at least 50% of my career on, that is really something that has not been studied since 1989. So it's really important, and I'm hoping to, since we did that first study, it was for the British government, then the department, and the oldsters there will remember the Office of Arts and Libraries. That was who our client was, and it was published by something else which doesn't exist, which is HMSO. So it was widely available, but that nobody, to my knowledge, has done an update study. I think it's important that people understand that when you take account of all the factors, this is an enormous cost. Again, do we ever really take account of the true cost of highways, right? I think that probably urban planners are doing a better job than we are. So I think that will also be a good a good next step. And I think that the third next step is probably some pilot projects, and that would help address the first question that was asked.
Excellent. Let's get to our next question. On the 3 R's, repatriation, restitution, and redistribution, where do you think museums are stuck right now?
Alexandra, I am so happy that you remember the 3 R's. I'm not, that makes me feel great, actually. Thank you. I think that all the first two are extremely important. Repatriation, restitution, they will go on in a way forever. You can even see by the data I just grabbed out of the paper the other day about the Vatican, 62 objects in 20 years. It happens extremely slowly and very painstakingly. And so it is. And these are very important. We should speed it up. We should do better. I think no one's been thinking about redistribution, even though redistribution is the basis of most of our taxation systems. I mean, everyone's familiar. Why do we pay tax? It's a form of redistribution of wealth, profit, things of that sort. Less popular now than it was when I was younger. But in any case, that's something that we just need to grab onto, think about. We're stuck, I think, we're stuck in prejudice. Not surprising. We're all cultural workers. We all deal with culture. Culture is about ideology and ideas. And again, these aren't moral things. These are actual facts. We're all engaged with ideology and ideas. And that's great. That's why we love our jobs and we have differences of opinion. But as long as we have a sense, and I have to say I see it, and I'm sure I'm guilty of it from time to time as well as anybody else, that prejudice guides our judgment, it will make it harder to do it. Because first we said, because we can't give things back, we can't restitute because they don't have enough museums. Well, that's sort of a prejudicial statement in a way, because we could have helped them and we should help them to have better museums. On the other hand, we have to recognize that in the global South, they're innovating new ways of museums, new types of museums. We have to recognize that we learn as well, and that's hard for us. So I think that that's kind of where we're stuck. Prejudice, that's where we're stuck.
Next question. What kinds of new roles or departments do you think museums will need to create or manage redistribution responsibly?
Phoebe, huge question. I'd be honest with you, no idea. The good news is we're certainly going to need more staff to do it. And we're certainly going to need new skills. And at the moment, there's a lot of investment happening in those skills. And in a way, there was a conference recently, actually, that made a big point of this. Museums are kind of slow catching on with the new technology. And I think that this would be an ethical way to do that, avoiding some of the problems of the technology, but using it in a way that ethically is highly responsible.
Thank you. Next question. Do you see a future where redistribution could reduce long-term operating costs, for example, by lowering storage expansion needs?
I think that is the point, and it should be a goal. In other words, it's all about measurable goals, not justice. It's not only about justice and equity, it's also about some measurable goals. Building for this purpose is not a good purpose. We'll still need to build buildings. And I say this with a lot of humility. I mean, if you go back, but I'm sure nobody wants to, but I'm interested in the history of my company. We've grown because museums were growing. We're museum planners. That's what we do. And so I'm looking in a self-critical way. I say, well, where does all this really end up? I'm sure there's lots of urban planners and highway engineers who feel the same way about their own work.
There's a Malcolm Gladwell podcast, I think it's Revisionist History, where he talks about a dragon sitting on its treasure and then discusses actually the Met as an example of having storehouses, and how the rest of the podcast went on to like, how do we open up those doors a little bit, not in the way that you're discussing, but it kind of a parallel exploration of that idea of how do we, and maybe this is a value proposition to museums to say, look, there's not just the benefit of like, you're not having to care for it, but it can really lower your costs.
Yeah, and I think I'm actually glad you mentioned a fellow Canadian, namely Malcolm Gladwell. Not that I'm a fan of his, actually. So lots of people have raised the issue about so much storage being a bad thing, right? Okay. However, we do have to and this is not a however, it's just another way of looking at it. Storage, the Renaissance probably couldn't have happened if there wasn't storage in the Middle Ages. I'm a fan of this guy Puchner, who writes a lot about that. So it's a question of balance. So people who only say, oh, it's so horrible to have storage. It's not horrible. Necessary data storage, collection storage, intellectual property storage, all these things are very important. The question is for what goal, for what purpose, and how to balance. So I'd like to just make that, people use it as a moral, kind of a moral argument. It's not about that. There's a moral dimension, of course. But maybe I could just say that, and maybe Malcolm Gladwell could talk a little bit more about it.
Let's take one more question. What could a museum without a V&A sized budget do to provide a storehouse-light experience for visitors?
Sean, that is a really great question. I think that there are now many different experiments in the this area of visible storage. The French call it visitable. You know, there's different terminologies around it, and I think it's an area that is not solely in the V&A. I think what the V&A has done it on the largest scale, and in fact, I know of many community museums who are doing interesting things with visible storage. So, and visible storage, by the way, is costly. It's not costly. It's much cheaper to just junk everything up in the back room. I hate to say it, not document it, not make it visually accessible except what you put online. So it does have costs attached. I think that it is a very, from an ethical point of view, as well as a practical point of view, I think it's a very worthy thing to do. And I can't speak for the V&A, but I'm sure that they would welcome people to come and look what they have done, because what they're doing is at a kind of, I would say, modest scale compared to some earlier examples. When you go, you'll see it's a lot like a library. In fact, I call it a library. It feels like a library of things rather than books, although there are books too.
Excellent. Well, Gail, thanks so much for sharing and for answering all these questions.
Well, thank you for allowing me to do this, because it's been a thrill for me. Thanks. Excellent. And anybody who wants to carry the conversation on, maybe they can contact you, Emily, and you'll pass things on, because I'm actually keen, to really do something, not just talk about it.
Fantastic.